This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this episode 969 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get into the mailbag questions today, did you know that you can already draft best ball teams for the 2025 season? You can join big board contests right now over on Underdog for all different entry prices. It may sound crazy to draft this early, but the contest will close before the NFL draft. So everyone's working with the same information. You just can get an edge right now if you know this draft class well. I'm not quite there yet, but I will be soon. And I'll be posting my rankings on the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon when I am there. To get ready for that, make sure you sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use promo code LATEROUND when you sign up. That'll get you a nice deposit bonus up to $1,000. That's promo code LATEROUND. And also, the Late Round Prospect Guide is available for pre-order right now as well. Just head to LateRound.com, make that purchase. It'll give you everything you need to crush your rookie drafts this year, but the information in it can definitely help with season-long and best ball formats too. You can see samples of what you get over on LateRound.com if you're still deciding. The price for the Prospect Guide, it's currently $14.99. It's going to rise to $19.99 once it launches on March 10th. Then it's going to be updated after the NFL draft happens. That's all on LateRound.com. Check it out. Now let's get to these mailbag questions. The first question this week is from the Polymath on Blue Sky. It says, are there any numbers that support this newfound success with rookie tight ends? Are we witnessing just an outlier driven by pure talent, or is there any information we can use moving forward? So a couple of years ago in the late round draft guide, I had Sam Laporta as a late round dart throw. And I'm not saying that to just pat myself on the back. I'm saying it because of the logic that was used. People were fading rookie tight ends because we hadn't seen strong rookie tight ends in the past. It was a rarity. The problem with that logic, though, and this is what I wrote about, was that teams didn't usually give their rookie tight ends a whole lot of run. They weren't running a ton of routes. But the players who were running routes, they were totally fine when it came to fantasy scoring. Now, I know that sounds like such an obvious and simple take, but it's true. Since 2011, we've only had 23 rookie tight ends hit 300 routes run in a season. In total, those tight ends average a yards per route run rate that was only about 0.1 yards lower than veteran tight ends who had that many routes run. Veterans are naturally going to be a little bit better than rookies. But when rookie tight ends get run, they're still able to score some points. They're able to be relatively efficient. Now, in recent history, teams are giving their rookie tight ends a little bit more love. Over the last 2 years, we've had 5 rookie tight ends hit 300 routes run. Now, that's an arbitrary number, but it gives us an idea of a player who's getting a decent amount of playing time. Since 2019, so the last 6 seasons, we've had 13 of those players, 13 rookie tight ends with 300 or more routes run. In the 8 years prior to that, there were 10 of those types of players. So that's going from 1.3 of those tight ends per season to 2.2 of them. That's not nothing. So we're seeing a slight uptick in just the sheer number of guys who are running a high number of routes as rookies. But your question is being asked, I'm sure, because in 2024, we had Brock Bowers. In 2023, we had Sam Laporta. And if I look at my prospect model, I think what we're seeing is just a combination of more opportunity and talent. Sam Laporta graded out really well as a prospect, which is why I called him out in that 2023 draft guide in the first place. Brock Bowers was elite. Even Kyle Pitts, I know he's really underperformed, but as a rookie, he was great from a fantasy perspective. And that's because he got opportunity and he was a good prospect. So I personally think it's just that simple. Teams are using these guys more. And in recent history, we've had some really good prospects. I wouldn't just draft a rookie tight end just because he's a rookie tight end. Because Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta really buck the trend. You still want and arguably need the higher end profile attached to that tight end for him to be more than a streaming type. This question's from Matt on Patreon. It says, how would you approach Terry McLaurin in Dynasty? On one hand, he's now attached to an incredible quarterback and the results were awesome. On the other, he's going to be 30, and it seems doubtful the touchdown luck will continue. So right now, Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 26 on Keep Trade Cut. He's ahead of DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Jaden Reed. He's right below Jalen Waddle and George Pickens. Now, I haven't updated my dynasty rankings for February just yet at the time of this recording, but I'd probably say that's a few spots too high. It has nothing to do with how special Terry McLaurin is and this new connection that he has with Jaden Daniels. But as you said, he's 29. He's going to be 30 in September. So you have to at least question how long he's going to be able to sustain the production. But I actually don't think that's the main reason that he's more of a sell than a buy. I think touchdowns are inflating how people view Terry McLaurin right now in all formats. In 2024, McLaurin's yard per route run rate, it was really good, but it wasn't anything that we hadn't seen from him before. His 23.3% target share, again, very strong, but it was right in line with what we typically see from Terry McLaurin. The fact is, Terry McLaurin had a career year with almost 16 PPR points per game because he scored 13 touchdowns. He'd never had more than 7 receiving touchdowns in a season before 2024. Now, let me put it to you this way. McLaurin accounted for over 44% of Washington's receiving touchdowns this year. We've only had 34 seasons since 2011 where a wideout hit a 40% touchdown share. And McLaurin went well above that mark. Of those 34 players, the only guys to do it more than once since 2011 have been Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, Devontae Adams, Brandon Marshall, and Dez Bryant. Now, is Terry McLaurin as good as those players? I think some of them for sure. But you have to keep in mind that McLaurin was doing this on a team that had 29 receiving touchdowns. DJ Moore's on that list while scoring 7 and 8 touchdowns because Carolina and Chicago had nothing going for them. We're talking like prolific touchdown scorers here. Guys who are known for finding the end zone. Like that is what Dez Bryant did. That's what Mike Evans does. And I'd feel better about this had McLaurin simply played at expectation with his touchdown scoring. If he was getting absolutely fed in the right spots. But that wasn't the case. According to PFF's expected touchdowns formula, McLaurin ranked 15th this past year among all pass catchers in expected touchdowns. His expected touchdowns number was 7.7. Again, he scored 13 touchdowns. Now you might be sitting there and you're thinking, well, Jaden Daniels is going to get better. And that raw total for Washington, as Jaden Daniels gets better, it's only going to increase. And I do agree that there's a good shot that Daniels gets better. He's probably the best rookie quarterback that we've ever seen. But don't discount how good the Commanders already were in 2024. They were 6th in offensive touchdowns per game. They were top 10 in passing touchdowns per game. So regression is likely going to hit for Terry McLaurin. And it feels like that side isn't being factored in quite enough. I don't think he's like a really, really obvious sell, but he's someone that I would at least see if I can get a nice return. Like if I could get Jalen Waddle, who's barely ranked ahead of him right now on Keep Trade Cut, I'd make that flip. This next question is from Twitter. It's from @GoVike0910. It says, with all the recent success of older running backs, what does it mean for our assumptions about running back age apex? So I'm not going to lie. At first, I had this long-winded answer for this one. I was digging into the specific running backs who actually beat the typical age trends this past year, and I was going to mention how we're probably overstating the number of older running backs who thrived in 2024, which I think is probably true. Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones to a degree, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, they had good seasons past the standard age apex. They're at an age where we typically see running backs decline, and they gave us good numbers. But I want to take this question and talk about things more philosophically instead. I want to speak more about the application of this sort of thing. There's been a ton of research done on running back age. Most will say that at the very least, if we had wide parameters, most of the high-end running back seasons will come from running backs who are 21 to 28 years old. If you want to shrink that, maybe you could say 22 to 23 to 26 to 27. But we have to keep in mind that these are trends. And we should never blindly follow trends alone. This is the exact same thing that happens in prospecting all the time, literally every year. A great example of it is with early declare wide receivers. I wrote about this in depth last year. But when it comes to prospecting via numbers, people will swear by the fact that you should fade non-early declare wide receivers because the trends tell you to. Since 2011, and this is according to my database that I quickly queried, but since 2011, we've had 53 first-round wide receivers who have had an opportunity to play at least 3 years in the league, aka they were drafted between 2011 and 2022. Now, of those 53, 38 of them were early declare wide receivers. That means that 15 of them played more than 3 years of college ball. Now, of those 38 early declare wideouts, their best season across their first 3 years in the league, minimum 8 games played, averaged out to be 13.5 PPR points per game. So the ordinary first-round wide receiver who was an early declare wideout saw a best season on average of 13.5 PPR points per game across their first 3 years in the league. With non-early declare wideouts, that number was 10.2. Now, I can go on and on about how early declare wide receivers are better than non-early declare wide receivers. And I actually do think there is some signal to it. Better players leave college earlier, generally speaking. But people always take that fact way too far. The truth is, since 2011, a lot of the non-early declare wide receivers have just sucked. If you look at my breakout score metric, which I did revise a bit this year, the average breakout score among these wide receivers, among non-early declare wide receivers, was 77.5. Among early declare wide receivers, it's 88, meaning the quality of player is just better because breakout score is something that does correlate to NFL success. This is exactly how I feel about AJPEX discussions. Just like early declare status, I do think there is some signal to it because it's logical. As players get older, they start to perform worse. Just like if a player enters the NFL at an earlier age, he's probably a little bit better than someone who goes back to school for another year. But you always have to look at the sample, and you have to look at the players that you're analyzing. It would be one thing if we had all these aged running backs, guys who were 29, 30 years old. It'd be one thing if a whole bunch of them came from nowhere this past year and performed well. Instead, it's literal Pro Bowler after Pro Bowler. Some of them are Hall of Fame talents. A lot of the guys who performed well this year at an older age had already proven to be really, really good talents. They've been borderline outliers when you consider their journey and what they've accomplished. There's nothing wrong with recognizing that running back age does matter because when you get older, you get less athletic. You can't do the things that you used to do. I know 95% of you listening to this show right now are nodding in agreement. I got really into running during my sophomore year of college. I was never a runner before that. I ended up running a 5K at a 6:30 pace. At 36, almost 37 years old, I'm never going to do that again in my life because I'm not 19 years old anymore. It didn't take that much training for me to get to that point. So of course the running back age curve and when running backs peak, there's always going to be validity to it. What we witnessed this season was really good players being really good players. And we should be open to that possibility when we're looking at trends that include every player, not just the really good ones. The last question this week is from Jamie on Patreon. It says, the 2024 running back class left more questions than answers. How are you viewing players like Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, Trey Benson, and even Tyrone Tracy moving forward? I mean, the short answer is not very favorably. Now, I reworked some stuff in the running back model over the last month. Nothing dramatically changed, but the way that I'm measuring breakout score did. So the scores are a little bit different than what they looked like a year ago. Regardless, though, the gist of the class looks the exact same. Jonathan Brooks was the obvious and standalone RB1, then there were a ton of question marks. And no, the model still doesn't love Bucky Irving. I got a question about that actually. Someone had emailed me asking about overfitting my models after I talked about Brian Thomas's ZAP score getting better. I talked about that on the episode earlier this week. And it's a valid question given how I communicated that. But I want to be clear that number one, it's pretty tough to overfit the sample that I'm working with. It's a lot easier when you have just a few years of player data. Number two, part of what I work on every year is making sure that that kind of thing is not happening. I'm not going to tailor my prospect model just to fit one or two particular prospects because the model got those guys wrong. That's just how scouting goes. I'm not trying to be perfect because that's impossible. But it's always fun to look back and see how hits like a Puka Nacua, how they look after some adjustments were made. Nacua, for example, does look better than he used to. I wish I had this current model back then. Not that I was like low on him or anything. Anyway, the model's updated, which means that year 2 scores, they're a little bit different too, because one of the major inputs in that year 2 model is ZAP score. Now, to put all of that another way, the year 2 model measures how well a running back or wide receiver is going to perform in year 2 or year 3 of his NFL career. And one of the things that it looks at is how strong of a prospect that player was when he entered the league, or his ZAP score. Because that still does get good signal after year 1. In fact, prospect score alone, it's a better predictor of year 2 and year 3 success than year 1 points per game is. That's at running back, not at wide receiver. Wide receiver, totally different story. Anyway, only one running back in last year's class has a year 2 score above 90. And it's barely above 90. And that's out of 100. And that running back is Bucky Irving. His score is being driven down by the ZAP model still not loving him. And then Tyrone Tracy is a few points behind that. Since 2011, that's the first time that's happened. We only have 2 running backs with a score over 80. Like after 1 year, the 2024 running back class is looking like the worst one that we've seen in over a decade of fantasy football. Now, obviously, there's a lot of reasons for that. The quality of player wasn't very elite from last year's class, obviously. We only had one really good prospect in my eyes, and that guy was coming off an ACL, and he tore his ACL once again during his rookie year. So how I'm viewing those guys, it's not really favorably. I can tell you that out of the bunch that you mentioned, the year 2 model likes Tyrone Tracy by far the most. But I'm always going to be hesitant to tell anyone to invest heavily in a day 3 back like Tyrone Tracy. He showed really good traits in year 1, but I don't know if any of those traits were elite. Bucky Irving's just a different kind of player. If I'm strictly basing this off of talent and what the comps are saying and what the year 2 model is saying, outside of Irving and Tyrone Tracy, I think Ray Davis might be the most interesting versus cost at this point. But in general, things are looking rough for last year's running back class. Fortunately, so far in my research, the 2025 one looks a lot better. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Remember to check out lateround.com, pre-order that prospect guide. Otherwise, everyone have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next week.